The story of Skid Row began with founding members bassist Rachel Bolan and guitarist Dave Snake Sabo, who hailed from New Jersey. While Rachel would have a typically female moniker for his first name, Snake would get his nickname from both the Frank Zappa film Baby Snakes and some strange body hair he possessed. Sabo lived a few blocks away from John Bon Jovi, who he was friends with growing up, and it would be that relationship that was instrumental in Skid Row's success, with Sabo telling Louder Sound that the pair made a pact when they were only 7 years old to both become rock stars, with the first person getting there promising to help the other out. He would recall to Louder Sound, "It was obvious that John was going to get there first, but he said that when our band was right, he would go out on a limb for us, and he was true to his word. John came to see us live, critiqued us, and provided the benefit of his experience, which was invaluable," he'd say. Bolan and Sabo both hailed from the Jersey Shore. In the mid-'80s, Sabo was working at the Garden State Music Store when he met Bolan, who came in one day looking for some strings for his bass. Sabo would recall to Rolling Stone, "He used to come in all the time and he just had this aura, or whatever you call it, about him." In a separate interview, Sabo would tell Louder Sound, "I'll never forget that moment. This guy walked in wearing a red beret and a pink leather jacket. He looked like a frickin' star. I just had to strike up a conversation," he'd say. The pair soon hit it off, but Bolan was already in a band at the time called Godsend, which he played in for about a year, a group that also helped him develop his songwriting skills. Soon enough, the pair decided to join forces in 1986, but while you may think the band's name Skid Row came from the infamous neighborhood in downtown Los Angeles, it didn't. Prior to calling themselves Skid Row, Bolan and Sabo threw around a couple names, including Darkness, after the Aerosmith song, with Sabo telling Rolling Stone, "We thought up the name when we were driving in the Garden State Parkway. We were on our way to practice, trying to think of what to call ourselves. And we saw tire marks on the road from an accident. I think I said skid marks and Rachel said Skid Row, and thus the band's name was born." With a name finally selected, both Bolan and Sabo would bring different and some similar music influences to Skid Row. Bolan would tell Louder Sound, "When it came to writing, we very quickly realized that while we both came from different musical backgrounds, me from Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, while Rachel's roots are in the Ramones, our styles complemented each other. It also helped that Kiss and Van Halen were a common denominator." And it didn't take long for the pair to find bandmates, as they soon found guitarist Scotty Hill, a New York transplant who had moved to Jersey to play in the local music scene, while drummer Rob Afuso was an NYU graduate whose resume included playing in a Rush tribute band. But finding a frontman proved to be a more difficult task. The band would enlist singer Matt Fallon, who had previously played with Anthrax and hit the club circuit around New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. It would be Sabo's old friend Bon Jovi, who by 1986 was a big star, and got Skid Row to open 3 shows for his band while they were playing in December in Pennsylvania. At this time, Fallon was still fronting the group and Skid Row were still unsigned. But following the gigs, it became apparent something needed to change with the band. Sabo would tell Louder Sound what happened next, saying, "It was exciting playing in front of 7,000 people, sold out with one of my best buds as the headliner." Then Doc McGee, referring to Bon Jovi's manager, comes into the dressing room and goes, "The band's great, the songs are great, but you need a singer. He's not the guy. He's not a star." McGee promised to sign the band in addition to several major record labels, sharing a similar sentiment that they would only sign them if they could find a new frontman. Fallon was soon fired, and the band would undergo a 9-month search for a new singer. Future Motley Crue frontman John Corabi was offered to audition for the band, but things apparently never worked out. It was during their search for a new frontman that the band would pen the hits including Youth Gone Wild, 18 in Life, and I Remember You, that would appear on their debut album. The foursome soon grew so frustrated with the search for a new singer that they even formed a short-lived cover band named The Blows, which played Sex Pistols and Ramones cover tunes. But their prayers would finally be answered. Enter Sebastian Bach. Born in the Bahamas to an accomplished painter and gallery owner father, Sebastian Bach's birth name was Sebastian Burke, and he would spend his youths in both California and Eastern Canada. He would admit to Rolling Stone he was, and I quote, "a straight-A bully" at the private school he attended that was also attended by Prince Andrew, who he described in the same interview as, and I quote, "a effing a-hole." By the 8th grade, his father would admit that Sebastian started taking a liking to music, especially rock and roll. But Bach would butt heads with his father over the best way to have a career in music, with his father thinking his son should attend Juilliard. But the future Skid Row frontman had other thoughts. By the age of 15, he dropped out of school and moved to Toronto, Canada, and changed his last name to Bach. Standing 6'3", Bach looked a lot older than kids his age, allowing him to get into clubs and play with bands, including the act Kid Wicked, a band whose members, in some cases, were twice Bach's age. And Bach would soon find himself performing at the wedding of a rock photographer, Marc Weiss, and singing on stage with the members of Twisted Sister and Kevin DuBrow of Quiet Riot, as well as guitarist Zakk Wylde. That wedding happened to be attended by David Feld, who knew the guys in Skid Row. Feld would eventually land a job working at Atlantic Records, which Skid Row would eventually sign to. I want to also note to you guys that in Sebastian Bach's Wikipedia Fact or Fiction, he claimed that it was John Bon Jovi's parents who were in attendance at the same wedding and asked Bach to try out for Skid Row. Rolling Stone magazine, who profiled the band in 1992, claimed it was David Feld who discovered the singer and got him to audition for the band. So you guys can take your pick. Either way, Skid Row sent a tape to Bach that featured a 4-song cassette of demos they'd been working on, including 18 in Life and Youth Gone Wild, with Bach recalling the louder sound. I kept listening to the tape because I couldn't get those 2 songs out of my head. I said if I could reinvent the melody lines, especially in 18 in Life, put in some Halford-esque kind of notes, I could make this into something that I would be really proud of, he'd remember. Rachel Bolan would tell Louder Sound his impressions of Bach initially, saying he sang the song so high that we had to rein him in, but after some work on his voice, it all fell into place. Sebastian was very obnoxious and loud, but we needed a singer. The good thing was he also had drive, and then some. But frontmen are supposed to have spirit, right? He'd say. After meeting Bach at the airport in New Jersey, the band went to a rundown club named Mingles in South Amboy, Jersey. Sabo would recall to Rolling Stone what happened that night, saying, "That night we got drunk and decided to jam. We had so much fun on stage together. It was a mess, but it was great. Then on the way out, we walked up the stairs and somebody called Baz an expletive, so we started swinging. We just met this guy and all of a sudden we're in our first fist fight. It was like instant bonding." It would be Bach's personality that was both a blessing and a curse. He was charismatic, but he was also very volatile and unpredictable. He would create headaches for the band in the years that followed, and ahead of signing with a major label, Skid Row would sign a publishing deal with John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora's company Underground, something that would leave feelings of bad blood in the years that followed. The deal with Underground would result in a lot of their publishing royalties going to the Bon Jovi pair. The band at one point also came very close to signing with Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith's label Geffen Records. Skid Row would end up playing a pretty poorly received showcase for Geffen Records A&R man Tom Zutaut, who signed both Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue, with Sabo recalling, "One day Doc called and informed me we had signed to Geffen. It was the day I'd been waiting for my whole life, but I was dismayed. This was the label that had told us that we had maybe 2 or 3 songs good enough for an album. Tom Zutaut asked us where we rehearsed, and when I told him, he said, 'Well, you won't be seeing me in that garage.' I was amazed by his arrogance. It was like Geffen were doing Doc a favor." The band would end up signing with Atlantic Records and recorded their debut album, which was self-titled, with Alice Cooper and Doc and producer Michael Wagner. The album would be recorded in the resort town of Lake Geneva, and located next to the studio was a convention center where the band would track drums for their album. Their self-titled debut record would be released in 1989, and the band got some prime touring spots, spending half a year on the road opening for Bon Jovi on their New Jersey tour, as well as playing with Aerosmith. During their days off from those tours, the band even scheduled club shows to hone their live chops and reach more fans. And it didn't take long for Skid Row's debut album to sell 1 million copies, as it was propelled by the success of 3 big singles, including I Remember You, 18 in Life, and Youth Gone Wild, garnering a lot of radio play and play on MTV. While the band had a lot to celebrate, Bach's antics also created a lot of problems for the group. In some respects, Skid Row soon became more recognized for the antics of their frontmen than their music. Bach would publicly blast John Bon Jovi, who discovered the band at the cost of him taking a large portion of their publishing. Couple that with the hugely controversial t-shirt that Sebastian Bach was photographed wearing backstage. Add to that a December 1989 show opening for Aerosmith when Bach was struck in the head by a bottle thrown from the audience. He would hurl the bottle back into the crowd, striking an innocent young fan, and it would result in Bach being on probation for 3 years and being sued by the family of the young fan, with Bach revealing to Rolling Stone in 1991, "I basically gave them everything I'd earned. I've done a whole video on that event, the link is down below." Bolan would admit his frustration with Bach telling Louder Sound, "It used to bug the hell out of me when he said things that Dee Snider, David Lee Roth, and even Paul Stanley had used before. It was so obvious. As our career progressed, pretty much all the shit that Sebastian said on stage became irritating. He'd tell the audience what a song was about, but it had nothing to do with the lyrics I'd written. Unless I ignored it, I'd have walked off," he'd say. Tensions aside, the band managed to release their second album, Slave to the Grind, in June of 1991. The album cover would be done by Bach's own father, and the album would make history, becoming the first hard rock album to debut at the #1 spot on the charts. The success of the album took Bach by surprise, who would admit to Rolling Stone, "I thought this album would enter the charts at like number 100, not number 1. It felt strange. I felt like I was walking an effing tightrope or something." Bach would hear the news that Skid Row had knocked out rap act NWA from the #1 spot, ahead of playing an opening show for Guns N' Roses at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. Dave Snake Sabo would tell Rolling Stone where the band's mind was at when they put out their second album, Slave to the Grind, saying, "For us, it's not just that we want to sell another 4 million records. What we want to do is stay around for a while like Aerosmith. We trade some sales for some respect because we're serious about the music." With Rachel Bolan adding in the same interview, "We'd like to be one of those incredibly cool bands we grew up on, whether it was the Sex Pistols or Kiss. We'd like to be great, you know." The tour to support the album was only met with more antics from Bach. During a summer 1991 show opening for Guns N' Roses at Wembley Stadium, it was at this gig that the Brent Council issued a written warning to the band not to play the song Get the F Out, warning the band that they would be banned for life and could possibly face jail time. Bach, going against the advice of his bandmates, read the council's letter on stage to nearly 100,000 fans, and a year later Skid Row were headlining with Pantera and Soundgarden opening in London when Bach dropped his pants wiping his butt with a copy of the Daily Star. Add to the friction escalating drug use amongst the band members, it was no surprise that the band was on their way to premature destruction. Bolan would recall to Louder Sound, "We had everything in front of us. It became a sore point. To this day, I will tell people never to do drugs. They'll end up destroying themselves or what they're working towards." By late 1992, Skid Row would release a covers EP titled B-Side Ourselves that would end up going gold. The following year in 1993, Skid Row's manager would tell the band that they should take a break, being quoted in Spin magazine as saying, "Wait for all the Seattle shit to die down." 2 years later, the band would release their third album, 1995's Subhuman Race. The band would drop Michael Wagner, deciding to work with Metallica producer Bob Rock. Musical taste has significantly changed by this point in time, and it can be heard on the album. The record failed to achieve the success of the group's first two records, only peaking at number 35 on the Billboard album charts, and Sabo would claim he was dealing with writer's block after the band got off the road in 1993, telling Louder Sound, "When I came off the tour, I couldn't write a song to save my life." Tensions only escalated within the group as the band didn't enjoy working with Bob Rock, and Bach wanted a bigger role in the songwriting. Sabo would tell Louder Sound, "I could understand his desire to write songs. Rachel and I had been learning our craft for 11 years. Sebastian could sing 18 in Life way better than I ever could, but writing a song like that isn't something you can just snap your fingers and learn." When that distinction got lost, that's when the real troubles began. The most interesting thing about Sebastian's ego was that it grew more and more out of control the smaller the band became. Spin magazine did a pretty great piece on Skid Row and a number of other bands on the state of metal in 1995. The article would really shed light on how things had changed for the band in just a few short years. Despite the fact that they were opening for Van Halen by 1995, their touring crew was limited to just 7 people, all of which slept on the same tour bus with the band. One of the band members would be quoted as telling Spin in that article, "There would have been 3 limos back in the day. Now we're relying on hotel shuttle buses to take us to the gig." Spin magazine would perfectly summarize what had happened to the music industry and to the band, saying, "Industry insiders, the ones quick to point out births, deaths, and rebirths, gleefully heralded that metal is dead. Anthrax is touring clubs in a van to try and reconnect," says one record company executive who asked not to be named. And they didn't even do the big hair thing. Megadeth's last album was a complete dog. That formula is dead. We've all walked away from it. Nothing's aged worse than that. And it was true that both Warner Brothers and Columbia had even phased out their own metal departments by 1995. The legendary heavy metal radio station KNAC in Los Angeles soon switched formats to playing Spanish music. Add to that MTV's long-running TV show Headbangers Ball was also canceled around this time. Those old days of carrying road cases full of makeup, mirrors, and leather pants were also gone for Skid Row by 1995. The band was now wearing baggy shirts and shorts on stage, something the band chalked up to convenience since they were more easy to fit into knapsacks instead of large road cases. Warrant frontman Janie Lane, who was also interviewed for the article, doubted that the change in appearance was out of convenience, telling Spin, "It's just not accepted anymore to come out looking glam. It doesn't help you get on the radio. I like dressing up or having a costume. Now the whole band struggles with it. Do we try to fit in, or do we do what we did 5 years ago and never get accepted? Yeah, I've worn flannel shirts. I'm ashamed to admit it." When Spin would reach out to other bands in the same article to talk about the state of metal, Poison refused to comment on the story, while Motley Crue's publicist didn't like the term metal being associated with the band. Despite the band's change in sound and appearance around the time of Subhuman Race, frontman Sebastian Bach didn't count himself a fan of alternative rock at the time, taking aim at Courtney Love as well as Nirvana and criticizing their drug use, telling Spin, "We don't cancel tours in this band," going on to call alternative and grunge, and I quote, "revenge of the college people. They hated all of us rockers in high school because we got all the chicks. Then they took over MTV and no rockers allowed." He would also share the same venom for MTV, who helped propel the band in the late 80s and early 90s, but now rarely playing the group's videos telling Spin, "We bow at their feet, we work for a TV station, I was that 20-year-old flavor of the month, the Eddie Vedder, Alanis Morissette thing, and in 5 years it'll be someone else." MTV would even answer back against Bach's comments in the same article, with Andy Shawn firing back, saying the network did play the video for one of the band's singles from Subhuman Race a few times since the network felt like it needed some exposure, saying, "We do have an agenda, it reflects what's happening in the music scene. As a genre, metal is not dead, but it's not what it once was." The Spin reporter who followed around Skid Row on their Van Halen tour even interviewed fans who attended those shows, and made the conclusion that it was industry insiders who were more obsessed with labels, as fans themselves spouted off both alternative and metal bands as their favorite acts at the time. I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts are on this whole debate in the comments section. By 1996, the band played a musical festival in Brazil, sharing the bill with Iron Maiden, King Diamond, Merciful Fate, and Motorhead. Upon returning to the States, the members of Skid Row knew it was over, with Bolan reflecting to Louder Sound, "I knew when I got off the plane at JFK Airport that I'd never step on stage with Skid Row again." He would go on to say, "By then we were viewed as a cartoon band, and the genre we were lumped in had been swallowed up and laughed at." The following year, the wheels finally came off when the band, 2 days before Christmas in 1996, fired Sebastian Bach over the phone. It's long been reported that a dispute over whether to open for Kiss, on top of Bach's ego, seemed to be a reason for the split. Bach reportedly wanted to open for Kiss while his bandmates didn't, thinking that the band was too big to open for Kiss. Bolan would appear on the Chuck Shoot podcast saying, "Things were pretty bad within the band, with all of us actually. We never heard from each other when we were home, and most of us lived 15 minutes from each other's house. And it started to not get fun at one point because it was all this BS that went along with preparing to do stuff, and whatever it was a relief in a way." Scotty Hill would point to a voicemail that Bach left for Snake, saying that caused a giant uproar is what it did. And Sebastian did something to Snake that was unacceptable. He called his house on Thanksgiving and said some horrible things into his answering machine, and Snake says, "You know what? I'm not going to be in a band with you anymore." There you go, it's as simple as that. Following the firing of Bach, the remaining members of Skid Row pursued other musical projects until finally reuniting with the band in 2000 with new frontman Johnny Solinger, who they put out 2 records with. Since then, the band has gone through a revolving cast of singers, but they've been a constant presence on the touring circuit. Bach, for his part, would pursue a solo music career, appear on Broadway, and even have a reoccurring character on the WB show Gilmore Girls. The band has supposedly been offered the chance to reunite with Bach,